you, Sue. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm Kate Swann. And this afternoon we're going to talk about doing research for books, how you research, where you look, what you find, how you believe what you find sometimes. We have three authors today, Vincent, Susan and Susanna, and they all write very different books, different eras, different genres, but it all involves an element of research into what they write. So I'm going to start by asking each of them to read a little bit from their books, just to give you a flavour of the sort of things they write. So Susanna.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My passion is World War II, and I'm doing a memoir, a fiction, and this is a poetry book with some factual notes in it too. So this is a poem, and it's called The Brave Soldier. I hear you talk of my bravery over your morning cup of tea. Standing tall and valiant, that's what you think of me? But you don't understand what bravery really means. As I walk toward the enemy, all is not as it seems. I don't think I'm brave, as I feel my hands shake. I can't hold the gun straight. I'm feeling such a fake. I'm supposed to be strong, defend my country till I die. But I'm so bloody scared, I just close my eyes and cry. I long to be at home, safe with my mum and dad, not hiding in this ditch, feeling desperately sad. And so when you call me brave, I just panic and want to run. But my destiny is out of my hands now as I stare at the man with the gun.
Yes, we'll move over to Susan now and ask Susan to read us a little something.
I have so many pairs of glasses these days. Put my number plus ones on. So I started doing historical research when I retired from full-time work in, when was it, 2009. And I started with women in war. And I got interested in women behind the lines in war and started to look at that in the First and Second World War. And the book I'm going to read you an extract from is this, The Year I Found Great Aunt Alice. Alice is the sort of heroine of the story, and her great niece is the one who unearths something about her life during both world wars. Part of that discovery is to discover that she was working underground. She was translating for the rebels, if you like, and she got captured. And this is the opening to the memoir that she wrote. Pen and paper have been my life. Now they may herald my death. But I asked for these, the traditional tools of my trade, and to my surprise, my request has been granted. I am seated at an old wooden table in a room I have never entered before. It must be near the larger room to which they have previously escorted me for my daily interrogation. For I have counted the same number of flights up the narrow wooden stairs, no doubt the servants' route during the former grandeur of this house. But today we turned right instead of left, and I am locked in this room at the front of the building. Before taking up this pen, I stood by the window for some while, gazing up at the blue sky and glimpsing down below the budding spring green of the treetops along the middle of the wide boulevard, from where I can make out the occasional growl of a motor. Unsurprisingly, the window is nailed shut, and there are bars across it. But for a while I rested my forehead against the central join and gratefully breathed the air leaking through it, cool and sweet, against the stale heat of the room. It is my first contact with daylight and fresh air since I was bundled in through a back entrance late at night a week ago. I knew it was somewhere in central Paris, and now I recognise the street, once the preserve of wealthy families like the long-fled Rothschilds. Avenue Foch. So I have little hope.
Thank you, Susan. And now again, quite different, but Vincent, please.
Mine's a bit longer than that. This is a piece from my latest book, which came out in August, so I hadn't started writing it when we did our thing earlier in the year.
Right.
This is Whirlwind Fury, so this is set in 1941 into 1942. As much as my books are always try to put as much action in as possible, I always try to build in a big element around psychological aspects, what it takes for men to tick and carry on and cope with everything that's going on. So there's this moment from about halfway through. So I'll start reading. I'm sorry, I do apologise in advance for the Scottish accent. That comes in towards the end. Grantham knocked on the door to Pickford's hut. He entered to see Waldron, Wilds and Pickford playing cards around a small folding table. Got a minute, boss? Pickford folded his hand and chucked the cards onto the table. I've got lots of minutes. What's up? He saw how uncomfortable Grantham was, so he jerked his head and they went into Pickford's room. Grantham waited until he closed the door. He felt like he was telling tales, but it needed to be said. I'm not sure, but I overheard a little scene in the mess earlier. I can't say I like the smell of it. Oh yes? Pickford asked, interested. Grantham wasn't the kind of person to gossip. If he was coming with a concern, it was for something specific. Carside was short with the new boy, Quinn, called him a type, and then Quinn didn't want to talk about it, caused a fuss in the mess. Pickford rubbed his chin in thought, his brow furrowed. I'm not aware of anything. Neither am I, Grantham said. He fought like a tiger today. I saw him. Leave it with me, Pickford said. Grantham bobbed his head, grateful to have unburdened himself, and left Pickford to it. Pickford didn't like gossip or rumours. He saw the effects of that kind of thing at court too often. He liked to deal in facts, so he went straight to the source. Quinn was in his billet. Cosgrove and Barrington were there as well, but they beat it fast when they saw Pickford's face. Quinn made a show of appearing unconcerned while he sorted out his flying kit. He looked tired, and Pickford knew he wasn't faking that. He got straight to the point. I'm not one to bugger about. Life's too short, so what's going on? Sir? Quinn played dumb. He really didn't want to talk about this, but he had a feeling he wasn't going to be given the option. The rumour mill, whatever it is you won't talk about. Pickford watched Quinn wrestle with himself. He neglected to mention that he'd read his personnel file. It was scant on detail. There was no official reprimand on his record, but 5 postings in 12 months was unusual. Whatever it was, it seemed to have started at his first squadron last summer. Since then, he'd been bounced from pillar to post with frightening regularity. It could happen for many reasons. Even something simple could make a CO take a dislike to someone. In 601, it had been called putting up a black. It wasn't anything, at least I didn't think so, Quinn began. He swallowed hard as he remembered that day. The sky had been full of fighters. It was every man for himself. It was a real mixer. My guns jammed. My leader ordered me out of the fight. I made it. He didn't. But no one else heard the order. When they tested my firing circuit later, it worked. He threw his flying helmet against the wall in frustration. I was the one who cut and run, so goes the tale, he said, his voice rising in frustration, the pain etched on his face. When I went to a new squadron, everything would be okay at first, then word would get around and I would be quietly shuffled off again. He broke off, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. Bitterness welled up in him at the humiliations of the past year. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the moves, it was the dark looks, the comments. He'd heard whispers on other squadrons. Quinn, the coward. Pickford thought about what Quinn had said, considering how likely or unlikely his story was. Gremlins did exist, and random faults could manifest themselves. Swain's cannons had jammed more than once a few months ago, but nothing had been said. Pickford himself had once flown a Spitfire that was an absolute dog sometimes, but not all the time. A pilot could claim high oil temperatures, an engine running rough, or even radio issues to get out of a fight. The thing was, there were only so many things that could go wrong with an aircraft. There would come a time when you had to just grin and bear it. Pickford compared what he had heard, looked at all the angles, and made up his own mind. Quinn was no coward. His actions today proved it, but a reputation once assigned was a hard thing to shake off. It could dog you regardless of the truth of it. It appeared to have followed Quinn here as well. I'm not interested in rumours, he said finally. I think for myself. Bugger the past. You carry on doing what you're doing, and if anything gives you grief, you come and see me. There was more, but it was getting a bit long. So.
So as you can tell, maybe around the same era, maybe about the same topic, but a very different approach. And one of the things I always wonder is, where do people start with their research? So Susan, where do you start with your research?
Well, I started back in 2009, before I even thought of writing a book, by enrolling at the British Library, which is a free thing to do. They had a terrible cyber attack, of course, recently, which has really closed them for a while. And I started with the Boer War because I wanted to find out more about the women, particularly the ones who went out to investigate the concentration camps that the British were running. So that's where I started. And then I looked at sort of the outside of the wars, things like the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, voluntary aid detachments, Queen Alexandra's nursing, whatever it was. And then I thought, well, what about the hidden stuff? And so I tried to find out about women undercover, and that's what led me to write this book. And I sometimes, I have in this case, include a short bibliography. So those are some of the books I looked at that I found useful, and I went and spent days at the British Library. In those days, you mostly had to go to St Pancras because they didn't have much stuff available up at Boston Spa Reading Room, which is near Wetherby, which is 50 miles for me to get to, but it's a bit easier than St Pancras. But I was mostly going down to stay with a friend in St Albans and taking the fast line into St Pancras, and then coming back, she cooked me my dinner. It was very good. And the kind of thing I came across were personal accounts, a bit like memoirs, of being a VAD, of being a member of the Special Operations Executive. And I found those so helpful in terms of giving me personal stories, but also sometimes with their own bibliography, pointing me in the direction of more books. So I did a lot of reading.
Susanna, where did you begin?
I guess to be honest, I began at school because I was fascinated by World War II, and then did it as part of my degree, and then so I've always had a natural interest in anything World War II. I think the thing for me, for the research, whether I'm writing poetry, non-fiction, fiction, in this era, is I like to totally immerse myself in that era. And that means every kind of research you could think of. So obviously reading books, and I believe Vincent and I have just been saying this, you can never read enough books on this topic. You think you've read them all, and then you go to a second-hand bookshop and there's one you've just never read. So yeah, obviously reading, libraries, internet, but I also go to a lot of interactive events, reenactments. I have dressed up quite frequently. I think my favourite was somebody from the French Resistance, which I got a lot of stick from at home. But I go to places like, I'm a member up at Eden Camp, if anyone's ever been. If you want to immerse yourself in World War II, that's your place to go. I was doing something, writing about the Blitz. How did it feel for people on the ground? How did it feel for the ordinary person on the ground? they have one of their huts. If you've never been, they have a lot of huts, each is devoted to a particular topic, generally around war, but specifically World War II, and there is a hut named the Blitz. And you go in there and you are immersed in what it would have been like in the Blitz. And for me, so there's the smoke, the bombs are dropping, there's a fire, people are screaming, and it's all, you can hear it, but you can smell it. It smells horrific, and you can see it. For me, things like that, as long as it's authentically done, it really makes it real for me. As you said, Susan, reading first-hand accounts is also really, really important. It can be quite emotional, I have to say. I've been doing a lot of research on the Death March of 1945, and reading the accounts of the prisoners who were part of that is horrific. I have to say, I kept putting it down. I couldn't sleep at night because of it. And it was a struggle because it's hard going. My father-in-law was actually on the Death March, that makes it more personal. But I do think it's really important to me to actually do more than reading, because I need to feel what they felt. I was doing some background research on the Lancaster bomber, and I was very fortunate to be able to do this. I went down to Lincolnshire and went on a Lancaster bomber. It totally changed my ideas of what it would have been like to be on a Lancaster bomber, because I didn't realise how tough it would have been for those guys, those airmen on a Lancaster bomber. It was like an assault course trying to get to your seat. And, that kind of immersion into what it was like then, for me, really adds to what I learn about it, and just brings a whole new light to it as well.
Amazing, Susanna. Now, and I know that Vincent does a lot about aeroplanes, so let's see where Vincent starts his research.
Well, I mean, certainly picking up on what you said, the personal experience plays a part, because when I was a bit younger, I was in the Air Cadets, and over the course of my cadet career, I got about 80 hours of stick time in a little de Havilland chipmunk and throwing it around. So I've got that feeling of what it is like to fly, and I've been to sea with the Navy, and I did some infantry assault stuff in the Brecons with the regulars when I was in the reserve. So luckily for me, I've sort of got a starting point, an experience base, but then I'd always been into military and stuff. When I was younger, I wanted to join the RAF, but my glasses prevented me from serving. So I've always sort of had that leaning towards it. And then I did a history degree, so I found that gave me a lot of the tools to do the research. And like Susanna and Susan said, it's the reading. For me, it's picking on something. It's got to take my fancy, a particular aircraft or a particular event, and then I'll start reading about that specifically and see if there's a story there, because I've got to either find a little gap in the history so that I can just sort of slot in my little fictional unit, or is my story going to follow along with the main events? So for Calico, for example, my 5th book, it was part of the Fleet Air Arm with the British Pacific Fleet, fighting alongside the American task forces all the way through to Japan. But then conversely, some other books, although they're set within a certain time period, like Demons in the Dark, that's very much more fictional, because it's just the background of the Blitz, and I can have them pretty much do whatever they want because they're night fighters and they're going up night after night. So it's finding that hook to keep me interested, because if I'm not interested, I'm not going to finish it. And like you say, pulling in the variety of sources. I mean, obviously one you didn't mention now is YouTube, because there's the Pathé newsreels, a lot of them are on there. The 50s war films as well. So that's going to give me a flavour of how people talk, how they walk, how they present themselves, what something looks like. So that gives me the grounding on which I can base the story.
And so how long do you research? How much time do you spend researching before you start to write?
It varies. One of the books, very detailed, and I mentioned it at the last event we did at the beginning of the year, ended up getting a lot of night raid reports from Kew Gardens, from Bomber Command, and it's the orange cover over there, Maximum Effort. Every single op that the crew go on in the course of the book was an actual op. So I'm basing it strictly on the historical record. So that was a lot of research. Sometimes I sort of cheat a bit. I'll do enough to get me started, and then I'll carry on doing the research piecemeal as I go along, just to add in the extra bits of detail that I need to get it through to the end. So it could be months, it could be weeks. It very much depends upon the subject. I mean, because obviously certain things I know a lot more of. One that's coming up in the future is going to be set in Burma, and I know very little about the detail that I need for that. So that one's going to be research. I'm looking forward to that one. So,
is that the same for you, Susan, or do you have other ways of doing that?
Well, in terms of how long I spend on research, I think it depends how much I knew in the first place.
Yes.
But, you've got to stop somewhere and start writing your book. And in the case of this one, this was a bit of a learning for me, because I joined a thing called the New Writers Scheme, which enabled you to submit a manuscript for feedback from a published writer. And I submitted this one. I was in the scheme for 4 years, from 2010 to 13. And I actually submitted this one twice, because it wasn't really ready the first time, and there was a lot of critique came back, so I reacted to that. Had a bit more research on bits and pieces to do as well. And then I submitted it a second time. So I'd say it was probably about 9 months research and 2 years of writing, something like that.
Right.
The other two extremes, in lockdown, I thought, what do people need? They need comfort. Let's write a Regency romance, or 2, or 3, or 16, actually, in the end. And they're still doing very well,
Good.
Especially in America. Amazing. But because the research I had for those was a common bunch of things that were going on in society, what carriages people were driving, what they were wearing, and so on, I had the same basic research to draw on, so I didn't have to keep re-researching. So it meant that I was able to produce 3 a year for a while. So at the other extreme, very early on in my even thinking about writing a book days, I discovered Violet Douglas Pennant, the lady who was the second Commandant of the Women's Royal Air Force in 1918, who got sacked after 14 weeks and never got justice. And I took 9 years to write her story. It's somewhere in the library, I think.
I've been reading that.
Oh, have you? Perhaps that's why I couldn't find it on the shelf to bring down and show people. Yeah, so I think it depends. And I think one of the things about doing a setting that is very well known, like the 2 World Wars, is there's so much material. So in the end, you've got to decide what you leave out, really. And I think the other thing you have to decide, that, bearing in mind what you were saying, Susanna, about the difficult stuff, it's highly emotional. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of pain, death, bereavement, mental frailty. How explicit as an author are you going to be when you draw on your sources and write that kind of stuff down? Some people will stop reading at a certain point in the book because they can't cope with it. And I think as an author we have some responsibility to make sure that we've got health warning on our books if they are like that, because I think particularly when it triggers personal connections, memories from family or friends, it's quite difficult.
Susanna, how do you feel about that?
I think, following on from what you just said, actually, I do agree that it can be quite emotional. But on the other side of that, for me, I'm quite passionate about sharing these stories, because I think when we stop sharing stories, it's almost like we're dishonouring the people who were involved. I was I'm in a group of people who all have family who were prisoners of war, different stories, but the same underlying issues. And I think we all agreed that it was really important that we don't forget what they did and how their life was impacted by this, not just when they were prisoners of war, but when they came home. For me, that was quite an upsetting thing, reading about what happened when they came home. We're talking about World War II here, how they were just practically ignored and shoved out, given £100 in a new suit told to go get a new job on Monday. Forget about all the stress, the traumatic stress that they went through. So I'm quite passionate about keeping these stories alive. For me, the research and the writing, I'm writing a fiction book at the moment. I know the outline of it straight away because it's just there in my head. So I research as I write, to be honest. There's a double agent in my story, and I'm looking at the side I'm researching what a German spy would have been like, what kind of things would they have carried with them if they were in this country. How would they have behaved? How did they learn to speak perfect English so they didn't get caught out? Little things like that, that quite simple things, but I don't actually know. And it has to be, even though it's fiction, I think it's really important it has to be authentic, because trust me, there's always one person out there that will know more than you do.
Yeah.
And they will catch you out.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And say, by the way, that never happened, or Churchill was left-handed, not right-handed. So you have to be, and it can be as simple as that, what are these, little, even, Churchill, there's a lot out there about him, great things to read, so you can kind of get your research from that. But what about the people who are not famous? But it's still important, if it was, a land girl, what was she wearing? I've been doing this recently, finding out what exactly did they wear. We've all got these little images of some of these films that we watch, but, really, what was it like, for them? So I write and research generally, but if I'm writing memoir, non-fiction, there's an awful lot of reading to do, awful lot of reading of people's accounts, and as harrowing as it can be, I feel like it's my duty and honour. That sounds a bit serious, but it's my duty and honour to actually read it and think, okay, I hear what you're saying, this is what you went through, and I'm listening, and I'm here to relay your story as best I can. And I feel like it's like an honour to do that, really.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. And I think one of the things about researching, when I wrote my memoir for my mother, was looking at what the weather was like at particular times. Because you can so easily get it wrong if you just get a detail wrong, can't you?
Yeah.
And make it just completely unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
So were the gritty bits the most difficult bits to research then? Where were the challenges? Where were the hard bits in your research?
As I briefly said, the accounts for me are the worst things to read. It obviously depends what you're researching here. You may be researching something that's quite pleasant, the wedding of someone or the celebration of something, but as I say, I'm looking at the death match, and it's I have to admit, I'm feeling quite emotional about it now. Actually, it's recalling what things were said, But this was a real thing. It happened. I'm here in 2025. Excuse me. Very blessed. We're safe, relatively safe here. We have food. And then you read something like that, and it's quite humbling. And it makes me, I put the book down and think, wow, how lucky are we? But probably we don't appreciate it and we don't know. But I find I'm kind of drawn to reading it because I feel I have to. Because to tell the story authentically, I can't ignore what happened to these people. You know, I can't, and like you're talking about the weather, the death march took place between January and April, May 1945, the worst winter ever. You know, they were marched across Poland with hardly any clothes on by the Germans. These were British and French, etc. And basically just a lot of them froze to death. The Germans murdered them when they couldn't walk fast enough, they had no food, they had to dig in ground looking for old potatoes, they were relying on the Polish villagers to throw them scraps, they ate vermin, caught live vermin and ate it. It's harrowing, but it happened, and I would be, I don't feel I could be an honest, authentic writer if I didn't read it. So it's a case of putting it down and keep going back to it, and try and read it, I think, when you're mentally feeling okay. But even now I'm kind of recalling things I've read by the people that were on it and feeling really emotional. So that's
Susan, what for you was difficult or hard to read, or maybe difficult to find even?
I mean, I'm picking up on the contrast between what people who face things like the Death March had to go through and what life has been for most of us since the First World War. And that's what I try to do in this book, because the year I found Great Aunt Alice, this is called, is 1987. I don't know if any of you remember 1987. It's Thatcher getting back for the fourth term, I think, and go-getting society and women in power suits and all that sort of thing. And what I wanted to do was contrast some of the, not nearly as explicit as what Susanna's been saying, but some of the experiences of Alice when she was arrested and so on, with what it was like for people in the affluent 80s, but also that in 1987, an incredible number of peacetime tragedies happened, from Zeebrugge to the King's Cross fire, and loads of stuff in between. It's quite astonishing how many things happened that year. And I wanted to use that to contrast with, you know, the kind of comfort, if you like, that Nadine, she was called, the great niece, and how she was changed by those things happening that year, because her perspective about her own losses, particularly of not just Alice, but other members of the family as well, as she found out. So, if you like to put it in context, yeah.
For me, the difficulty sometimes is maybe having to tone down some of the brutality, because the kill count in some of my novels can be quite high, because quite a few of the books have involved very low level operations, and in the 40s, if you didn't have at least 800 or 1,000 feet, if you're bailing out, your parachute isn't going to open. So if you get hit at low level, it's either pile in, that's it, curtains, or you crash land in some fashion and you become a prisoner. But obviously, as far as the squadron's concerned, you're not coming back. You're either in the bag or you've been killed. And I've always wanted to sort of portray that the aspect of war is war is not, in and of itself, is not glorious. There's bravery, there's courage, but if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's it. You know, you could be the best pilot in the squadron and it just won't matter if you're in the wrong place. The difficulty for me actually has come with the latest novel, which I'm actually researching, but for the first time I'm actually going to have my main character right alongside actual historical figures, because it's a very small unit, and it's involving the Malta siege with faith, hope and charity. And there's also a much more personal connection because of my family hailing from Malta as well. And I've sort of had this book in my head for about the last 20 odd years, and I've now sort of felt that I'm good enough to do the material justice, but it brings with it the difficulty it's much more personal this time, and striking the right balance suddenly has become a little more difficult, because whereas normally I would be very ruthless with the characters and just in the service of the story, I now found myself having to make choices in a slightly different way, because I'm having to much more strictly follow the historical events, and the scope for that is a little bit different. So it's proving harder, because the thing I had to basically decide was, in the end, I'm going to have to make fictionalised versions of these pilots, because the resource material that I've got, some of them have direct quotes in. So the writer must have spoken to these guys when they were alive. Flip to the back of the book, no bibliography, great. Probably spoke to them. There's references to them having journals and things. Don't know where they are. So I don't have enough material to properly fictionalise or bring the actual historical figures to life. So I'm going to have to make them fictional instead, because I'm not about to trample all over these guys' historical contribution, and as I see it, sort of dishonour them by making it up as I go along. So I'm going to still do that, but I'm going to do it with versions that I have more control over, because I think to do it any other way, it isn't right, and that's wherein the difficulty lies. So I've got the real events, and now I'm having to pick over I'll make use of that bit, but we'll not have that bit happen, because I'm trying to give the flavour, make the story entertaining, but at the same time respect the men involved, and that's the difficulty I've got this time. For the first time, I've never really had this problem before now. Other difficulties, just to cover, is really sometimes knowing how much detail to put in, how much detail not to put in. Because at the end of the day, it's a story, it's here to entertain, it's not to preach a particular viewpoint. I'm just here to tell the story. So I'll start off, I'll probably write too much, and then that gives me the room to pare it back as we edit through for the finished product.
So that, because you made a comment to me about the disparity of when you were researching, weren't you?
Yeah.
Where you find something that you think, or you've read something that you take as read and as real, and then you read something else which contradicts that. So
Yeah.
is that a difficulty when you're looking at your research, in deciding whether to believe it all or none of it, or make it up?
No, I mean it's a good thing. I mean, to give two examples, there's a colleague I know who does Tudor fiction, and obviously the well-known fact is Queen Elizabeth did a speech to the troops at Tilbury in preparation for the Armada, and there's about 3 or 4 versions of the speech. There's 1 or 2 versions that are much more accepted in the mainstream, and I think one of the third one's coming from one source, and everyone's a bit and you're faced with, well, if you pick the third one, you're going to have some clever clogs come in and go, oh, well, that's not the right speech. Well, there's 3 or 4 versions of it here, so you've got a bit of wiggle room. I found with my latest novel, Whirlwind Fury, in the wide world, the Whirlwind was a little-made, undeveloped aircraft. It served in 2 squadrons, and it served for about 3 years, and then it was canned by the RAF. And by reputation, it was because it was too fast to land in short grass airfields, the engines were rubbish, and it had a host of other problems. In very recent years, 2 particular books have come out that actually have spoken to a lot of the pilots who were on the squadron, and you find that just ain't so. The engines were perfectly fine. They very often landed in the short airfields that, as far as the higher-ups were concerned, it wasn't suitable for, and they were flying from them every day. So I now have a situation here, because obviously I'm writing this book, and everybody's got this idea of what the plane's like, and I've got cold, hard facts that show it wasn't. So I've very much gone towards the let's try and put historical records straight aspect here, and I'm just telling it like it was. And rather than preach that aspect of it, it is there, and you can divine it for yourself. And then I mention a little bit at the end. I always do an author's note at the end of the book about certain elements of the novel, of what is factual and what is fiction, to sort of set the record straight. But it's difficult, because again, another one of my books dealt with an aircraft which again had a certain reputation, but in this case that one was actually well founded. So then it became a case of how much of that do I put in? So it was the opposite way around. I had more than enough material to say how appalling it was, but now I'm having to maybe cut back a bit here, because we're trying to stay focused on the story. But there's always going to be someone who's going to write into me and say, oh yeah, that's not right. Well, it's fiction. Okay, we have the scope where we can say, look, if it doesn't match the historical bit, that's because it's a story. Okay, and there we go.
Susan, have you had that sort of
Well, I think,
issue?
as Vincent said, it's fiction. I was thinking, if we're writing fiction, and I think with the author's note, as long as you confess that, you've made some of it up, and it depends what period you're writing, but mostly the period I'm writing about, any real figures in that period are deceased. They can't sue me for libel. Apparently, some relatives of people have tried to do that when they've been not happy about how something's been portrayed. I don't know how many of you have read Geoffrey Archer's William, he's a policeman, William, no?
No.
He's just written the last one called End Game. And it's set with his William, whatever he's called, who's the senior police detective. He's been the gold commander at the Olympic Games in 2012. And he starts, his opening thing is, there were 22 things that happened in the 2012 Olympics that the public don't know about. Blah, 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 blah. And then he says, 13 of those actually happened. In other words, I made up the other however many it was. And he doesn't tell you. I've still got to finish reading it, but it's a guessing game, I think if you're writing fiction, as long as you don't, I don't know, give a... Well, I don't know, actually. You could give completely the other way around view of something, couldn't you, if you wanted to? I did this with... the Tranby Croft Baccarat scandal in 1890. It was when the Prince of Wales attended gambling was illegal, but you could have private things, and so well-to-do houses had them. And this guest cheated, and they tried to keep it quiet, but the Prince of Wales current mistress, Lady Brooke, she was called the Babbling Brook, she spilt the beans and someone found out. So he was furious. He said, you're going to keep it quiet, I'm going to sue you. So he sued the householder where the game had been held. And of course he lost. Now I used that in my story. I had the Prince of Wales there in a different house. I changed the name and I changed the outcome. Because when the cheating man sued, I had him win his case because the householder had done something very naughty during the weekend and they didn't think he deserved to get any money out of it. So I had a bit of fun with it. A few people have read the book because I'm self-published on Amazon, so I can see who's been reading it in what country and whatever. No one's come back to me and said, oh, naughty, you shouldn't have done that, so I got away with it.
You started the book about the truth or otherwise.
I actually put it at the end of the book. I let people read it first, and then I tell them. And I put something like I did a little dose of author's imagination. There we go.
For me, I do try and be as authentic as I can when I'm writing. I think particularly with World War II, there is, as we've said, there's so much information about it. It's very easily readable. People can access it quite quickly, and there are still people around that have some connection to it as well. So you have to be really, really careful in honouring what you're writing about. I'm quite passionate about that. You do have some, obviously, particularly writing fiction. There are some. I'm writing about, as I say, this German agent. I don't know if there was an agent in a Yorkshire village in 1942. Absolutely no idea. There's no way really for me to find that out. I'm just presuming it is, and it's a story at the end of the day. However, within that story, I need to make it sound authentic. I need to find out if that happened in a village in Yorkshire. What would it have looked like? What would the person have looked like? What background would they have had? Why were they there? What were they trying to do? You have to have some poetic license, I think, to things like that. And a memoir as well a little bit, because you are looking at accounts, but you are sometimes having to fill in the gaps. There are gaps. I've got big gaps in the Death March. There just are gaps because these guys were not walking around documenting everything, because it wasn't the right time. They weren't able to do it. So you have to do your best at the end of the day. And there probably is always someone out there who will criticise what you've done anyway. I was contacted by somebody who had a go at me for even bringing up this stuff. You shouldn't be writing about World War II. You shouldn't be writing about what happened. And I have no answer to people like that because that's their opinion and that's fine. I guess my answer is just don't read the stuff then. You don't read it. Yeah. Go read Jack Canary or something. I want to write about it. I do the best I can to honour the people in it. But if you don't want to read about it, you don't read it. Basically. Not fussed.
Well, that's probably the best answer, isn't it? Does anybody in the audience want to ask a question of any of our... Yes.
Nobody's mentioned AI, which is, of course, the big thing at the moment, and wondered if any of you are using it and how useful you found that, or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, I do use AI. I use it for research. I know there's a huge controversy at the moment. I just ignore that because to me it's just another research tool, like the internet, books, library, personal accounts. My son and my stepson works in AI development. AI is much, much bigger than we think it is, and it is developing at a huge rate. His opinion of AI is that, because don't forget, it's not just about books and AI. AI is used in everything. And everybody thinks, oh, you're just stealing stories from authors. It's really not that at all. It does happen. They are taking strands from different things. But for research, I find it really, really good. I needed an image quite quickly of a 1940s bride. What would she be wearing? It came up in seconds. I don't know how long it would have taken me to find that out. The only thing with AI is, as any research, like internet, books, historical accounts, you have to just double check the source. You have to double check the information, but I do that anyway. I read a historical book and they got the end of the Second World War flipping wrong. I couldn't believe it. It was printed and it was just completely wrong. So even books get things wrong. So I do use AI for research purposes. And I think that with AI, I'll just add this, really, that I think like when the internet came into being, we were all quite scared of it. Oh my gosh, it's going to be dark and all these nasty things on the internet, which there is. But I personally believe if we embrace it and we taught how to use it responsibly and approach it that way, it doesn't have this stigma attached to it. And it's here to stay. However, and it is used for really, really good uses as well. It's not just about stealing stories. I have heard as well on the grapevine that publishers are also using it, top publishers. I'm not sure why they're using it, but they are using it. But yeah, I do use it. I'm quite open about using it for research. You know, like, you know, give me an image of a German, you know, an ordinary German working class man on the street. Bang, it's there. It's very difficult to find that out, you know, in other sources. But as always, just double check all what they're saying, because AI can say some strange things.
So which things are you using? What are you using? ChatGPT?
I use that one personally, but there are many, and
Is that the only thing you use?
that's the only one
Yeah.
there are others, Claude, Perplexity,
Gemini,
etc.
I was going to say, what do you use?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
use Chat.
You use
GPT.
Chat.
Gemini.
I get on with that
Yeah.
quite well, and because it's quite chatty. It remembers my name, which I find absolutely amazing. I'll ask it something. It says to me, "How are you today, Susanna?" Which was a little bit scary.
Yeah.
But I really like that, especially if I'm feeling a little bit lonely. It's like there's somebody there. I do use it, but I just it's just another tool of research to me. That's all.
Susan, do you use it?
Not on purpose. I mean, when you do a search now,
Yeah.
the first thing that comes up is
Yeah.
AI summary.
Mm.
And I try and avoid looking at it. And I go down, and one I do look for is always Wikipedia, which I know some people knock. I really admire the people who run it. It's a not-for-profit organisation, and they are very careful about trying to check the standard of what's put up there. And there are very good entries, and there are very bad ones. And when they are not properly documented, there's a sort of health warning against that entry. And I find them very useful for looking at the end to the bibliography and going back to original sources, because that's what I like. You know, I go for the ABC: accept nothing, believe nobody, check everything.
Yeah.
I've used it. Not for writing. For giggles, in my last novel, I asked both Gemini and ChatGPT to write a scene. And I said, right, I want you to do with these characters, these names, and it was lower than Mills and Boon level. It was really melodramatic and all that, and it was laughable. So for what I do, I'm quite sure for writing technical papers it's perfectly great, but for what I do, it can't get anywhere close to what I want.
Yes.
But conversely, what was really good Tessa said, write me a story outline of 10 chapters for a story about da-da-dum. Instantaneous, bang. And every single chapter had a chapter title, there was an overall arc to the story and that. Then I asked it to do another scene where one of the boffins would be explaining radar to the pilots. And it actually quoted some very, very specific engagement range, azimuth data and stuff, which I actually was looking for and hadn't yet been able to find. So then I said, right, what was the source for this material? Boom, and it popped up a really obscure web link to something which gave me the information about that particular AI set that I was actually after. So it is really useful. It has its place. It certainly can't come up to the level I would even be remotely happy using anyway. But there's a way into something like, for example, I think it would be very useful, even if the standard of writing is atrocious, if you get really, really stuck on the scene, writer's block wise, you could say, do that, and it'll give you something that you can then make use of and use it as a springboard to get you out of whatever hole you've got yourself into. So it is useful. Like Susanna said, it is here to stay. Do check everything, because it can be wrong. But it's like anything else. It's like books can be wrong. Books, particularly based primarily on, say, a first-hand account, can be wrong because people remember things differently. I've seen plenty of examples where something's quoted as gospel, and then when you actually start digging into it, no, it wasn't that. They came from a different direction that day at a different time. So although the salient points are right, the nitty-gritty detail can be quite varied. So the AI can be useful, but it just limiting the scope so that you can remain authentic as a writer.
Anyone else?
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Can I make a small comment?
You can.
It's just that I wrote a book to remember the Second World War, and what you didn't mention was the sound effects. I grew up in Lancaster, and the one thing I remember is the sound of aircraft flying over, going to Barrow-in-Furness. So that's the sort of dimension that
Yeah, and it's important, and that's when I was talking about Eden Camp. That's why Eden Camp is so important to me, because it has the smell, the sounds, the sights, which you don't get from reading in a book. I want to hear what it was like when that bomb was being dropped on that city in the UK, and the smells. And they have Eden Camp. I don't know if anyone's been in it. It's the most scariest. I've been hundreds of times. I'm still scared every time I go. It's a German U-boat, and I always run really quickly through it, even though I know it's fine and I know it's not a proper U-boat. It's really claustrophobic, and just you can imagine it, and there's all the sounds going on in the background, like things ticking over. It must be machinery or something, and then water, and it's really, and I think it's important that's why I'm so passionate about immersing yourself into the era that you're in if you can. Because sound, you're right, is really, really important. Particularly aircraft, I think, is really important, because there's that, like the Stukas. That was, I've spoken to people, witnesses, and they said the Stukas are one of the scariest sounds that they experienced during the war, because there's that silence before the bomb is dropped. And Germans actually put something on their planes deliberately,
the siren,
to actually make, psychologically, to have that effect on the people who were listening.
Thank you. Well, can I encourage you to come up and talk to our authors afterwards if you've still got questions for them? Please do. Please have a look at the books. And can we just say thank you in the traditional way? It's been brilliant.